My name is Laura Miller, and this is a story that still makes my chest tighten whenever I think about it. It is a story about family, about asking for help when pride tells you not to, and about discovering love and trust in the most unexpected moments. When I married my husband, David Miller, I knew that stepping into the role of stepmother would come with challenges. But what I didn't know was how deeply my stepson, Ethan, would change my life in ways that words can barely capture. When David and I first got married, Ethan was 16 years old. Like most teenagers, he had his own world, his own friends, and his own set of guarded walls. At first, I wasn't sure how he felt about me stepping into his father's life. I tried my best to respect his boundaries, never pushing too hard, never forcing conversations that he didn't want to have. I knew that the role of a stepmother wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned. In the early months, our interactions were polite but distant. Ethan would sit quietly at the dinner table, answering questions with short sentences. He was kind but cautious. David reassured me again and again that Ethan was just naturally reserved, that he wasn't upset about me, but I could feel a subtle hesitation in him. He wasn't rude. He just wasn't ready to let me in yet. And I told myself that was okay. Building trust takes time. What I didn't know back then was that one moment, one decision, would completely transform our relationship forever. And it all started with something so simple, me needing help. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I had just come home from a long day at work. I work as a middle school teacher, and anyone who knows what it's like to spend hours wrangling dozens of energetic kids knows how draining it can be. That particular day had been overwhelming. I had stayed late grading papers, then got stuck in traffic. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it felt like the world had drained every ounce of energy out of me. I remember walking inside, dropping my bag by the door, and heading straight for the kitchen. David was still at work, running late because of a meeting, and Ethan was upstairs in his room. I decided to start dinner, even though I was already exhausted. But halfway through, I realized I couldn't do it. I burned the first batch of chicken, dropped a pan on the floor, and then clumsily spilled water all over the counter. That was the breaking point. I stood there, staring at the mess, my eyes stinging with frustrated tears. I hated feeling weak. I hated admitting that I couldn't handle it. But at that moment, I felt small and defeated. And that's when, almost without thinking, I called upstairs. "Ethan? Could you come down here for a minute?" My voice cracked slightly. There was a pause, the sound of footsteps overhead, and then he appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at me with mild curiosity, not annoyance, not impatience, just curiosity. "Yeah, Laura? What's up?" he asked. I hesitated. Asking for help wasn't easy for me, especially from someone who I still wasn't sure fully accepted me. But in that moment, I swallowed my pride. "Would you mind helping me finish dinner?" I asked softly. For a second, I expected him to groan or roll his eyes. He was, after all, a teenager who probably had better things to do. But instead, Ethan nodded almost immediately. "Sure," he said, walking over without a second thought. "What do you need me to do?" The relief that washed over me in that moment was more powerful than I can explain. He didn't hesitate, didn't complain, didn't treat me like a burden. He just stepped in. What started as a simple act of help turned into something so much more. That night, as we cooked together, something shifted between us. I showed him how to season the chicken, and he joked about how it looked like cafeteria food. I laughed, probably harder than I should have, but it was the first time we had shared a natural, easy moment together. We set the table side by side, moving around each other in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. And when David finally came home, surprised to see both of us in the kitchen, Ethan grinned and proudly said, "Laura taught me how to make this." I helped. It was a small sentence, but it meant everything to me. After that night, our relationship began to change. Ethan started coming downstairs more often. Sometimes he'd hang around while I cooked, casually asking questions about my day. Other times, he'd tell me about school, about his basketball team, or about the funny things his friends said. It wasn't overnight, but slowly, steadily, the distance between us started shrinking. One evening a few weeks later, I found myself struggling to fix a loose shelf in the living room. Without even being asked, Ethan walked over, grabbed the screwdriver from my hand, and said, "Here, let me do it." I remember watching him, my chest swelling with pride, not just because he was helping but because he wanted to help. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how much Ethan was letting me in. And in turn, I began letting him in too. I shared stories about my childhood, my struggles in college, my first years as a teacher. And he listened, really listened. There were still moments of teenage moodiness, of course. There were times he shut himself in his room or gave me one-word answers. But those moments didn't sting as much anymore because I knew, deep down, that the walls between us had cracked. The moment that truly solidified our bond came a few months later. One evening, I received a phone call that left me shaken. My younger brother had been in a car accident out of state. He was stable, but I needed to drive several hours to be with him. David couldn't leave work right away, and panic was rising in me. Without hesitation, Ethan stood up and said, "I'll go with you, Laura. You shouldn't drive alone when you're upset." That drive, with just the two of us on the road, was when I realized just how much he had grown, not just as a teenager, but as a person who cared about me. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He asked me questions about my past, about why I became a teacher, about what I thought made a family strong. And in turn, I asked him about his dreams, his fears, and the things he wished people understood about him. By the time we reached the hospital, I no longer saw Ethan as David's son. I saw him as my stepson, yes, but also as my family in the truest, deepest sense. Looking back now, I realize how powerful that first moment was, the night I asked him for help in the kitchen. If I hadn't set aside my pride, if I hadn't taken the risk of reaching out, maybe we never would have broken through that wall. Today, Ethan is in college and he calls me at least once a week. Sometimes he asks for advice. Sometimes he just wants to share something funny that happened in class. And every time my phone lights up with his name, I feel the warmth of that bond we built, starting from one simple request for help. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choosing to step in for each other, choosing to help without hesitation, and choosing to build love even when it feels uncertain. Ethan taught me that, and I'll carry that lesson for the rest of my life.